working on a bank holiday. Now I see why you cry. You've been watching your best days slipping by.
Hello and welcome to the Wheels of Wisdom podcast, where I set off on two wheels to talk to interesting people about interesting things and take on a challenge or two into the bargain. So one of the things I've been keen to do with the interviews was to find a perfect location where people feel comfortable and also somewhere new and exciting for me to go. And unfortunately that's often outside, and when you are outside there are a lot of external noises, and despite a new shiny microphone some of the sound's not as perfect as I would like. But I hope you'll enjoy the content and forgive some of the early sound gremlins. On with the show. Okay, so we're here for the very first inaugural podcast with the guinea pig, the man that loves to eat it as well as be it, Tom Kevill-Davies, a.k.a. the Hungry Cyclist, who found fame, but not yet fortune, but it's coming, hopefully, on a wonderful cycle tour going from east coast of US all the way to Rio on his bicycle, which took you how many years?
2.5. 2.5
years. Now, I remember reading a quote from Lance Armstrong that every endurance athlete is running away from something, and it reminds me, of course, that at the time we were actually working together, so I have to assume that it was me. Is that right?
It was the final defeat at the football table, Christoph, and that sent me away. Now, was I running away? Probably a little bit, yeah, or running towards something, but I think there's certainly an element of something that drives you to get on a bicycle and cycle for a couple of years in strange lands. I think you're certainly searching for something. And I was 27 when I left and had never really travelled. I'd been on family holidays and things, and was just very keen to see what else was out there. And having got into cycling, I always kind of enjoyed riding a bike. I was really just keen. It's a great way to experience countries and cultures, and once you do it once, it's very hard to travel in any other way, really, because it's just so pure. And your body's in good shape, your mind's in good shape. It's just a lovely way to get about.
Yeah, because your wonderful little catchphrase was cycling the world in search of the perfect meal, which encapsulates it beautifully. And now you've been asked this question a few times, but did you find the perfect meal, and if so, what was it?
Yeah, I ate a lot of perfect meals, and I mean, it's the joy of riding a bicycle is that you are always hungry. And as my mum says, hunger makes the best gravy. Food, when you've been cycling a 40-kilo bicycle all day in tropical heat or in the mountains, is that meal at the end of the day becomes absolutely sacred. So I had numerous perfect meals, but one that stuck with me and which I cook a lot at home now is ceviche, which is the Latin American fish marinated in lime juice and then kind of seasoned with coriander and chilies and various different things like that.
Of course, now not only were you previously looking for the perfect meal, now you're trying to create them. The inaugural ceviche supper club.
Yeah.
So what gave you the inspiration?
You realise that if you can ride a bicycle for 2.5 years around the Americas and where else, and then kind of write a book about it, which is something I never thought I'd do, and get it published, anything becomes possible. But the ceviche supper club was really nicely came about because everyone asked me what was your perfect meal. And ceviche is always the answer, and there's no way you can get it in London.
Until now.
It's a great way to get strange people into your house and cook for them. And I love cooking for people. It's something that I take enormous pleasure out of, more than cycling, probably.
One of the things that always strikes me about you is you have this sort of endless optimism and enthusiasm for life,
wow.
Which is a great quality, or at least that's the bit that I see.
That's
I don't see the darkness that lies behind it.
No, of course.
And you seem oblivious to the fact that the Western world is on the brink of collapse.
Well, I think if it's on the brink of collapse, everyone should get out there and do what they love doing, because there are no dress rehearsals, as it were. Try and remain optimistic. Life is always better when you're optimistic, and if you pull yourself out of having a job, which I did, working with you at a very successful online advertising agency. It was. No, if you pull yourself out of that routine and go out on your own, it's difficult, and it does have down moments, and it has moments when you think, what on earth am I doing? And it's very difficult to make a living out of what you love, which is strange. So there are down moments, but you invariably cooking, getting on your bicycle, coming out to beautiful places just like this in Richmond Park reminds you that, from what I can see, the world doesn't seem to be on the brink of collapse.
Yeah, but certainly days like this, it helps remind you that the simple things in life are wonderful. So we should point out that we are in what Tom considers looking at the best view in London, which is overlooking a gorgeous lake on a beautiful bench in Richmond Park. And although it's January, and when I looked at the weather this morning, I saw a big fat 0 against the temperature. It's actually sunny and gorgeous. And we just cycled through the park, had a little tour with Hungry Cyclist himself, and we're stuck, just awaiting to go, hopefully, for what will be a perfect meal, but at least a good one.
Perfect meal from when I worked in Richmond years and years ago. There is a fish bar called Quality Fish Bar, and it doesn't seem to have changed since about the 1950s.
Fantastic.
And it's full of kind of old ladies enjoying their Friday lunch special.
And sweaty cyclists.
And sweaty cyclists. So we will go there to refuel. Richmond Park for me if it does all get a bit much, this is a place I come to just to unwind and remind yourself that engineered life to a point where you can come here on a weekday and unwind. It's a good reminder of why I do or try and do what I do.
Yeah. And of course, for fans of YouTube, you should be able to just hear the gentle sounds of Benson in the background as a hound.
This is where it happens.
Yeah, it's a hound. Dispatches the stags.
Yeah, I think in years to come there'll be cycle tours that come there and point out, and this is where the famous YouTube sensation took place. But it's a beautiful park, and you're probably hearing birds if you're listening to this. There's parakeets which live in the oak trees down on the right. If you go and have a look, you can often see them nesting in there. And you see a lot of stags and deer, and there's a little raven just walking by.
Potting around, trying to get in on the action.
Yeah.
For me, one of the great days off is just going on a bicycle somewhere, getting lost in the countryside. It gives you some time to think and just process life and stop, and as well as actually get a bit of exercise. There's how you deal really with the loneliness of being on your own. And I remember you mentioned going to Southeast Asia, where you don't speak the language, you've only got some basic forms of communication, and you're there every day. I imagine sometimes you go for days without seeing many people, and how what keeps you going, what keeps driving you on.
Yeah, I mean, that loneliness and solitude are two very similar things, but two totally different things. And I think the first question you asked was, what was I running away from? Why did I go on a trip? And I think one of the reasons I set off on the first trip was to just have a bit of time to myself and have a bit of solitude. And there's it's wonderful just to have that time to kind of untie knots and think about things and see the world. But then on the flip side of that, on the flip side of the solitude is the crashing loneliness, and it does exist, and also in foreign countries. Invariably you're eating with other people, at least trying to, and food as a language is incredibly powerful. And I mean, one tip I'd certainly give to people is, if you're going to another culture, learn some food words. And I don't know if this is true, but I have a theory that food covers the most words in any vocabulary. The kind of subject of food, because it encompasses colour, it encompasses all the ingredients, it encompasses different kind of cooking techniques and stuff. That's probably, someone will probably prove me wrong. But loneliness is very difficult, and there are various different ways to deal with it. Reading is a great way to deal with it. Occupying yourself. I take a sketch pad whenever I go on a big trip, and not only is that a great way to meet people, it's also a great way to occupy yourself when you're feeling a bit lonely or a bit blue. So
for us self-conscious Westerners that are plodding into an unknown village where you don't speak the language, I mean, how do you get over that first sort of awkwardness and kind of breaking the ice? And
it never kind of loses its awkwardness, really. It very much depends what culture you're in. I mean, if you're in Colombia, for example, where the Latin culture is much more kind of open and vivacious, and there's music everywhere, and then it's almost a point of finding the right person to kind of hang out with, and so you can find a good place to eat or a good place to stay. But take that to northern Laos, where people don't see Westerners at all, and people rightly are very suspicious of Westerns, it's very difficult to kind of not just break over the language barrier, but break over the kind of the suspicions. And children are genuinely terrified on you. You're a big kind of blonde-haired, blue-eyed bloke who's arrived on a bicycle covered in bags and looking quite wild. You can understand why they're a bit nervous. For me, or sketching. Ooh, the little dog's come to say hello. Painting or sketching for me is it's just a great way. If you can sit down and start drawing, children are invariably attracted by that, and they think that's...
So that was Benton, he just came in to join us.
I was waiting for a shout. We got shouted something.
Benton!
Yeah, always a great way to meet people is to start drawing or painting, because it's a universal kind of language. And it's a great way, because children love it. Children are absolutely intrigued by it. If you sit down anywhere in the world and start sketching something, children will come and look at it, and they are absolutely, they think it's amazing. They think that you've got a kind of magic pen, because it's what you're looking at a tree in their village, and that tree is then being transcribed onto a bit of paper. And you have to remember that in a lot of these villages, pens and bits of paper are still quite rare commodities. And the children will then start looking at you, and you can let them have a go and all this kind of stuff. And once the adults see that you're kind of okay with the children, things open up. And often it takes time and patience, and but invariably you end up having a fantastic meal with a family in their home, in a culture and a memory that's going to stick with you for the rest of your life. And it's just having something like that that is universal.
So we touched on the imminent collapse of Western civilization, which we'll see. You want to go back to work on Monday, whether that's happened or not. But in the meantime, it's looking pretty nice in the countryside. There was some of those lost skills which we increasingly through technology no longer require, at least if we have a good 3G connection, and things like navigation. So when I go on my little jaunts in the countryside, I love getting lost.
Right.
But
Proving that you're not lost.
Yeah, but knowing more or
gadget.
less, I'll find my way, because I'm a dot on an iPhone somewhere when I eventually get a connection. It means that I don't worry about that. But the thought of being on your own and in northern Laos and lost. I mean, how did you navigate yourself? You just have a map and ask people? Or?
I had a map, and the ones that you do come by are pretty inaccurate, especially on the border with Burma, where the Mekong borders Laos and Myanmar, Burma. And the roads, they're getting washed out every year as well in the rainy season, so a lot of them are just dirt paths, and so you're asking people, but again in a language that there are barriers, and so you have different ways of working out whether what they're saying is true, because again, and I found this all over the world, is a lot of people don't like to show that they don't know something. So if you ask them, or how far is it to this little village, you might say, is it 20 kilometres? And they'll nod. And then you'll ask the next person, and they'll say it's 50 kilometres. And so there's no real way of finding out. But when you, I don't know how you navigate really. I mean, the compass is very useful, because it tells you if you're heading in the right direction, and you can use that on the map. But I don't use GPS, I don't use any of the fancy stuff. And I've never really been lost, and I think as long as you're on a path that other people have walked or driven, you're going to end up somewhere. And then from that somewhere, you might better get somewhere else, and therefore you're not exactly lost.
Sometimes you can't always reach your destination, particularly if you don't know what that destination is. And so I believe you brought your tent with you wherever you went.
So and a hammock.
So what are the top tips for finding a good campsite? And also, because I understand in certain parts of Vietnam, they're not necessarily that keen on you just pitching up.
It's illegal to camp in Vietnam. Wherever you stay, you have to register with the local communist commissioner of that area. They don't like you camping, and I had a terrible time trying to camp in Vietnam, so much so that I kind of gave up camping there. But top tips for camping: if you're in a hot tropical country, take a hammock. Not only is it's just a much more kind of refreshing way to sleep. It's much more lightweight. It also means that you can sleep in the middle of the day, and often in these tropical countries, it's so hot in the middle of the day that it's just lovely to take 2-3 hours out and not be cycling under that fierce sun. For finding campsites, you get a nose for it. When you start, it's difficult, and your mind asks, well, can I camp here? Can't I camp here? Is it safe? But once you get used to it, you get a very good nose and a very good eye for a camp spot. You find places that are out of sight. You find places that are dry. You find places that are perhaps quite near water, so you can wash and swim. You find areas where there's a bit of wood lying around, so you can start a fire. Somewhere that you can lean your bike up against, possibly a tree. I'm quite militant with it, and I often, if I'm camping, will decide where I'm going to sleep an hour before it gets dark. That's my rule. Is you know what time it's going to get dark, and so you get to 4 o'clock. You know it's dark at 5, so you say, right, I will now stop at the next place that looks like a good camping spot. And you start that look, and invariably you end up somewhere. And I remember cycling with Amir, my Israeli friend, in California, and he used to get terribly panicked. He was at the beginning of a trip. And he'd go, where are we going to sleep? We must get to this town. We must get to this village. We must get here. There is a camping spot here. We must get here. And my answer to him was, Amir, you will sleep somewhere. And I think if you're comfortable with that you will sleep somewhere, because your body at some point will say, actually, you need to sleep now. And even if you curl up in a baseball dugout or in a petrol station or under a bridge, you will sleep somewhere. The secret is training yourself to find those good spots, explore areas. Top tip, make sure you're out of sight. My best tip is, and I use this in Mexico a lot, and I used it in Brazil a lot, and Colombia, and all of Central America, is that most villages have a small cafe or restaurant, and it's normally no more than a couple of open fires and a shelter, and it's for truckers and van drivers and bus drivers and people passing through. And if you can go to one of those and order a meal, and then just ask invariably the lady who's running it and say, is it okay if I just put my sleeping mat on the floor? I've never been turned away. And what's nice about that is you get to eat, you get to have a bottle of beer, and then roll up and sleep on the floor of a restaurant. And then people know where you are, locals know where you are, you're safe, and going to sleep out of sight is all very well, but you sleep very lightly because you never know who's going to creep round the corner, and any noise will wake you up. If someone said you can sleep on the floor of my little restaurant or pick the tent up in the garden, you're safe, and you get a much better night's sleep.
So you should point out that we've got the perfect background noise
Yeah.
for this, along with the sort of tweets of birds and the sound of Benton sniffing my leg. We've also got the gentle whir of the occasional bicycle as
Some
they
whirring
come
more
past.
efficiently than others.
So I spent a lot of money hiring these extras. I hope you appreciate
Very
it.
nice of you, Christy.
Yeah.
Very.
Well, actually, you were very privileged to see the bike that went from East Coast America to Rio. I don't know why you didn't do the return leg. It's very lazy of you.
It was, yeah.
Indeed, is this the one that cycled up the Mekong?
Up the Mekong.
The very same bike?
It's been from Cairo to Jerusalem, all the way around northern Spain.
Although that is built like an absolute tank,
Yeah.
so there is a finite limit to the amount of gear that you can stack on there if you're actually going to make any progress whatsoever. So I'm really curious to hear what your top tips were for packing and your essential items that you should bring.
Items, gosh, yeah. It's endless debates within the slightly geeky cycle touring world about how you should pack and what you should take and what you shouldn't take. And I can guarantee you that you will after about 2 weeks of cycling, send probably half of the stuff you've packed home with you and realise that you don't need it. You can look at endless websites that will tell you of various gadgets and gizmos that you must have on a bicycle tour. You don't really need any of them. But my top things, I spoil myself a bit. I think comfort is worth carrying. You meet people who chop the handles off their toothbrushes and cut the C out of maps and things because it saves them half a gram here or 2 grams there. But I take a sketch pad, I take my paints, I take a good camera, I love photography, I take a good cooking stove, I have a Trangia, which is a Swedish stove, I take a selection of herbs and spices, I take some olive oil or cooking oil in a little squeezy bottle, I take a hammock and a tent. Other essentials, people will go on about various kind of clothes and high performance jackets and jumpers and fleeces and windproof, sweatproof, waterproof. But the best way I've always found is if you're going to starting your tour in a very hot place, don't take much. And when you get to the cold place, buy some clothes where you are. Invariably, they're going to be a lot cheaper than buying them in the UK or in the Western world. For packing, you get to that campsite in the evening in the first couple of weeks. And I'd never really camped before in my life, before my trip around the Americas. And it would probably take you about an hour and a half, to get everything out, to get your tent up, to do this and do that. after about 2 months, it was about 10 minutes, and you just become incredibly efficient about where things go, the order in which you need them, when you need them, what time of day you need them. Get to a camping space and have everything ready in 10 minutes means that you can then lie on your back and read your book, or go for a swim, or do a bit of painting if you're still wondering where the Allen key is that attaches the guy rope to your tent, or whatever kind of gizmo it is. It's incredibly frustrating. You stop forgetting things. I remember when I first started cycle touring, I'd just leave gloves and sunglasses and hats on tables in cafes and stuff, and then you cycle 40 miles the other way, and then you think, oh, balls, and you never go back. So to have a good packing system means you don't forget anything, and it's wonderful to reward yourself when you think you've forgotten something, but it's exactly where you know it is. You feel like MacGyver.
And did you bring kind of an essential kind of cycle maintenance kit? It was amusing on the way here that the famous bike, the famous bike the pedals nearly fell off for wanting a good Allen key, so you had to stop and borrow one. And then later discovered they were actually underneath my saddle on my bike. So that's preparation for you. I think the habits are starting to slip.
Everything's starting to slip.
Yeah.
Going soft, getting flabby.
Probably a man who's after your own heart is Michel Roux Jr., the
he's a
restaurateur who's a great marathon runner.
Yeah.
That's his addiction. But I was reading a piece from him whereby he was saying that the more that he got into running, the more that his body started demanding certain types of food and demanding that he avoided other types of food. So one of the things that I've noticed in my limited little commuting jaunts is that if I have some processed meat or I don't know, some sweets, then you really feel it on your way home, and your body over time starts rejecting things. So if something's extremely fatty, you just don't feel like eating it if you're regularly exercising. So what have you found the kind of perfect fuels for you, and things that your diet's adapted?
It depends where you are as to the perfect fuel, and I always, just through the nature of what I do, collecting recipes and journaling kind of food culture and photographing it and writing about it, I try and eat what the locals are eating. And most of the time, if you're in a developing country, what people are eating is hard-working food. If you get to one of the kind of big metropolises of the world, people are sitting at desks, and they invariably then are eating food that isn't necessarily to make their body efficient. It's just to kind of keep them going through the day. Whereas if you eat in a village in the foothills of the Andes in Colombia, the food in that village, you're pretty much guaranteed it's going to be good for people who are walking and herding cows up very steep mountains all day. It's probably quite good for cycling. Are there specific things that I go for? Fruit. Always eat as much fruit as I can
fruit gums, of course,
and fruit gums.
The ultimate tip.
Well, I have to say, I do
slightly processed.
I normally don't have a sweet tooth at all, but when I start cycling, I develop an incredibly sweet tooth, and that is simply that my body is requiring or demanding quick energy. The secret is not to obey it all the time, but to have a packet of boiled sweets in your handlebar bag is a great treat, and especially if you're in. I remember cycling across the Midwest of America. I had a particular bag of boiled sweets, and it's quite a boring place to cycle, the Midwest, kind of straight roads, 200 miles long, and I used to time myself and try and break the record on sucking these particular boiled sweets. That's how bored I was. But yeah, and little treats like that. I mean, I love a beer at the end of the evening, which I know a lot of purist cyclists would disagree with, but huge amount of calories. It's not sugary, sweet, nasty pop, which in a lot of countries that's the only other alternative. And in a lot of these hot countries, the beer isn't that alcoholic, and it does, take the edge off the day. It's a little reward, a little treat, something to look forward to, and it helps your muscles relax, and probably means you're going to get a better night's sleep in your tent.
There you go. So if you take nothing else from this podcast, get Tom's top tip, which is to drink beer of an evening.
Drink beer and then sleep in your hammock.
Sleep in your hammock.
Says the Hungry Cyclist. No, I get quite a lot of. I get teased regularly by other friends of mine in the cycle touring community, but I'm very happy the way I do it. For me, it's about enjoyment, and if you work hard, cycling all day, there should be a little reward at the end of it. Why sit around eating bird seeds at the end of the day and energy bars when you can eat fish tacos and wonderful grilled meats and all this kind of stuff.
Of all the things to tease you about, probably drinking beer is the least of your vices. So
you speaking to my mother. Yes.
She'll be editing the podcast.
Yeah, oh God. So I'd say to anyone, if you are planning a trip, whether it's a week or 2 months or 2 years, take something that you love with you, whether it be music or architecture or poetry or fishing, whatever. Take that with you, because it gives it structure and it gives you a reason, and it also means that when you come back, it gives what you've done a bit of context. And I think that, for peace of mind, is really, really important. And drink more beer.
Drink more beer.
Yeah, beer for cycling. If you've been on a long cycle tour, if you've cycled 80 miles, the joy of it is you can pretty much eat whatever you want, and your body will deal with it.
You can have a famous Paris-Brest.
You could have.
Which,
a
have you
famous
seen the
Paris-Brest.
contents of that? That's not
It's
something to take.
My favourite pastry.
Unless you've done the trip.
Unless you've done the Paris-Brest. Paris. It's there and back, isn't it? If people are wondering what Paris-Brest is, it's a cake from France, which was designed by a pâtissier on the route of the Paris-Brest bicycle race, which is the first bicycle race, kind of official bicycle race ever. I think it was inaugurated about 1870, and he had all these kind of mad cyclists on bone-shaking bicycles going past his door twice, and so he invented a cake that looked like a bicycle wheel, and they're delicious.
It's filled with pralines?
It's filled with it's a choux pastry in a kind of disc, like a donut. That's the wheel. It's filled with a kind of praline cream, which is pumped in rather like air, a very airy kind of whipped up cream. That's the air, and then it's almonds are put around the edge. That's meant to be the tread of the tyre, and then it's dusted with, I think, chocolate, and that's meant to be the dirt of the road.
Fantastic. Well, on that bombshell, all this talk is actually making me really hungry. And it's about 1:30, and I think it's time for some lunch.
Chip shop.
So we'll see. We may not find a Paris-Brest, but we'll have some allegedly the best fish and chips in London.
I think it's
we will
one of the
see.
best, certainly. Yeah. Quality fish bar in Richmond, and maybe a pint.
Maybe a pint just to see it off, just to get us home. So thanks again, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Let's hit the road.
Yeah.
So if you're enjoying the music in this podcast, perhaps unfortunately more than the content itself, then that's thank you to a certain Marcus Hillier who very generously agreed to let me use his music for free at this point during the podcast, although I wait with interest a letter from his lawyers once this goes out. And indeed, maybe we'll meet him later on in this series of podcasts. But for now, just enjoy Marathons by Marcus Hillier.
And you can run your marathons, and I will watch my television. Yeah, you can run your marathons, and I will drink my medicine.